I'm recording.
Can you hear me
Right,
now?
yes.
Yes, it does.
Excuse me, my crayon is a monkey. I find this conversation very
I'm interested in learning a bit more about technology, philosophy, and I like to.
I'm an educator.
Absolutely. We're going to stay anonymous.
That's a cop out.
The binary's gone. I thought jingle was like Dutch for cheers.
From Warsaw, I'm Chris.
From Cordoba, I'm Finn.
From Winchester, I'm Lewis.
Sometimes we have, a serious topic to debate, and normally I will be fighting these guys.
Yeah.
But other times I think it's good just to have a conversation, and I'd quite like to do that here. So there's a few topics we can touch on. Buddhism, I think, is obviously an area of interest. When you talk about altruism, that's exactly my background in evolutionary psychology.
Cool.
And also, I think we never really talk about this. We get a bit meta and talk about why we're all podcasters and what that's all about and what the interest is. So what do you do when you're not making podcasts, Lewis, if you'd like to sort of introduce yourself? Because this is our first time talking, right? I know nothing about you.
It is indeed, yeah. Other than long back and forth over email. Yeah, so outside of podcasts, I think two of the big things, music and poker. Right now, not much going on, is there, because of self-quarantine. All the music festivals this summer have been cancelled and the casinos are all shut. But I've been keeping myself busy, listening to a bit of Spotify and playing a little bit of online poker. Very low stakes, I'm not very good.
But you go to casinos, you take it quite seriously.
I've been getting more into that actually in the last 6 months, and I've been travelling.
Oh, of course, because you've been around Asia, where there is actually quite an exciting casino scene in some countries.
Yeah, in some countries, depending on the country, I think Thailand doesn't allow casinos.
Not so much. It's incredibly illegal.
Incredibly illegal.
We'll just have on the record that none of us have ever gambled in Thailand, and that wouldn't happen.
I don't even know. Absolutely not. I've never done that.
The exception, interestingly enough, is funerals. So a Thai funeral is 5 days long. And at it, you're allowed unlimited drinking and gambling, and the host party is expected to just turn the place into a pop-up casino. And the community takes full advantage of it. And you see, it's considered bad form to be upset at a funeral, and if you cry too much, it makes the ghost stay. So it's a 5-day exercise in stiff upper lip, Asian restraint.
Let's have a blast.
And yeah, some people take that very well and just start throwing big bets down in an illegal street casino. It's amazing.
Then why do you get places like Poi Pot on the border where people go across to go and do gambling? There should be enough funerals, right?
Not for some gamblers,
Maybe
Finn.
not,
There's
yeah.
just never enough funerals. So. Yeah, I used to be huge into poker.
Really?
Yeah, definitely an addiction.
We used to play a lot.
And we used to
play a lot.
Back in the day, me and Finn were playing twice a day. It
Oh,
was
wow.
ridiculous.
Were you playing live or in online?
Yeah. We had this lovely house we used to crash out at. Play poker, play chess, play pool, play guitars.
That's brilliant. That's
there was
brilliant.
always a game going on. Skate. Yeah, it was amazing.
Happy days. As my memory of studying philosophy at university was mainly like skating, playing football and playing poker. And chatting about philosophy while doing it, so.
Well, we would call it interdisciplinary studies because we'd all be studying a different thing and we'd all just sit around talking about it. And I would get some, interesting perspectives from the other fields of expertise.
Definitely.
Exactly. So you studied philosophy yourself then, Finn?
Yeah, I did, yeah. What about you?
Yeah, no, philosophy as well. I didn't realise you also did.
I'd always find interesting people and chat about those topics with like Chris or other mates. So that was always fascinating. Always like bringing philosophy to the everyday person and just seeing what they thought about it,
No, I mean, that absolutely is like how it's done. Like, you can be criticised that it sounds like trying to justify being a waste man, but I think it is the case that philosophy is about like just discussions and casual discussions as well with different people. In my house, there was 9 of us at university, and I think the majority of us studied philosophy, actually. The one who actually would do the best on essays was the one who never turned up to lectures at all and would do his essay in about 36 hours beforehand and would copy essentially an online encyclopedia. But, he was discussing philosophy the whole time and getting his ideas that way. I don't know how much of it you can really you can learn it formally, like lectures are good. I'm not going to say to anyone who's listening, don't go to lectures. But what I'm saying is like casual discussions are like a really valuable way of doing philosophy.
We all know those people though that would be in the library all day reading all the books, and a lot of the books at university are written by the staff, right? So then what you end up doing is parroting your own professor's things, and especially at bachelor level, like they just end up reading 80 essays that are written the same. Or the textbook says this. Yeah, me having not been corrupted by any of those classes, I was able to disagree with all of the prominent professors at my university's theories, which people were surprised, all the teachers' pets were surprised to learn they actually appreciated, because when you're a professional academic, you're getting attacked left, right and centre. And I don't think any of my critiques were revolutionary, but the ability to have someone be like, oh, I've thought about this different way. And often I found with academic dogfights, it was just a case of defining your terms. I was doing psychology, and I was taking that philosophical principle I'd been talking to with Finn. Well, are they defining their terms? And often in the, one theory states it must be so, and another theory states, no, we've done different research with different metrics and we found the opposite. And you're like, no, you guys have just defined the same thing slightly differently, and that's why there's a different, right? The synthesis was the very hippy-dippy way of getting an easy A on an essay, I found.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely true, actually. I mean, a lot of philosophy is literally about definitions, define what is good. And as you said, people are having all these disagreements, and you find that what the crux of the matter is you've made a different definition at some point of the argument.
You talked about the waster man, and it reminded me of, there's an old film that a few people have watched called the Tao of Steve. And the guy there makes the point that why do we venerate the Eastern yogi, the monk that goes and lives in isolation, doesn't get a job and sits around thinking about things, but we don't venerate the Western slacker?
Yeah. Well, dudism, man. I think maybe we do nowadays, after the Big Lebowski. But I always find it funny, like, imagining the opposite of, like, the stereotypical kind of Western kid who discovers Eastern philosophy, like, imagining there's like a Chinese kid who's like quite edgy, and he's like 19. He's like, oh, I'm well into my Plato at the moment.
Nietzsche and Schopenhauer, that's where it's all at.
yeah. Just, oh, mate, if you read Kierkegaard, it's so sick. It's so, I thought it was quite cool.
There probably is, though, like, goth kids, black coats, studied in Europe, like,
I've got a question for you, Lewis, on this topic. I don't know if you'll agree with the assumption baked into the question, but why do people get turned off when they hear the word philosophy?
What I would want to ask, in what sense do you think people get turned off when they hear the word philosophy? You got experience, or?
A little bit, yeah. I think if you do philosophy, I've got this distinction between like doing philosophy with the people and then like academic philosophy. So we touched on that earlier, academic philosophy. I've got a bit of a critique of it, just that it's very wordy, build themselves somewhat into an ivory tower. Go on, Chris.
As the non-philosopher in the room, I think I'm most qualified to inform you guys, who are both massive fans of philosophy, why we, the non-philosophers, switch off as soon as it comes up. And I think there's a couple of main... One is the cliche, right, of arguing what is what. But what is what is what? Yeah. But what does that even mean? And you're like... This isn't an interesting conversation. It's just like a dog chasing its own tail. I'm sure some interesting thoughts were posited from that discussion over 4,000 years ago. But now when you watch a first year's philosophy student positing it like it's revolutionary, everyone's just like, yeah, sorry, we
get some new material.
We just have to get on with life, really. And that, I think, I'm a big fan of Candide's Voltaire, where, the arching theme of that story is they spend a lot of time debating the right philosophical model to apply to life, and in the end they're just like, once they run out of money to have the luxury to sit around pondering such pointless things, they just get on with life, and that's where they're happy. So I think there's a bit of that. And the other thing that bothers me is like sometimes it just becomes too removed, too airy-fairy. And I think like any academic pursuit, once you're talking about this person's treatise on this person's treatise on that philosopher, there's so much learning that has to be done in order for me to understand the debate you're having that it's just not worth it.
That's what I'm talking about, the inaccessible thing about like maybe more academic philosophy. But I think the actual doing philosophy, it depends how it's done, right? I think there's some people who are really good at doing it. One example is maybe like, I don't know if you know about Earthling Ed. He's like a vegan activist, but he's very Socratic in his method, but he's not a dick about it. Do you know what I mean? So that's quite interesting. But I find that when you really want to get into something and really think deeply about it, like half the people or more just go, I haven't got time for that. Ain't nobody got time for that. So what do you reckon? What's your thoughts?
I mean, I think that's one of the biggest critiques you can make. In terms of the academic critique, I do think you could pose that against any discipline. Like, I think any discipline requires, like, if you want to get into the nitty gritty of it, like a lot of background knowledge. And I don't think that's special to philosophy.
Yeah.
When you say, like, the word philosophy turns people off, the reason I asked initially is I find that quite surprising because, at least in my own experience, maybe this is confirmation bias because I like to hang around with people who like to talk about philosophy. But if I bring up
and those that don't aren't hanging around with you anymore.
That's the other way of looking at it.
A selection criteria.
But I feel even day to day, if you bring up a debate in ethics, maybe is abortion justifiable, or in philosophy of mind, like what is consciousness?
Whoa! Off the bat, Lewis makes it controversial.
Maybe not the abortion one. But I feel a lot of people are open to having kind of philosophical discussions. Yeah, I mean, I know what you mean, again, in the academic sense. If you want to get down into the nitty gritty, like a lot of the time, a lot of people, myself included, are eventually going to be like, okay, let's just leave the matter at bay and get on with our life, because there's only so far down to the rabbit hole you can go.
Yeah, like David Hume just went, that's all fascinating, but let's go and play football. That's what life's about.
I think people have different thresholds in terms of like how much they're willing to think about those ideas. Like, I certainly know people who, if I tried to bring up anything philosophy related, will just be like, nah.
I think we all know people like that, and they're very much people, quite pragmatic people, I think, at the end of the day. And it's not a bad thing necessarily, but it would be nice if they would just do like half hour chat. You know what I mean? So another question for you, Lewis, relating to your podcast, because your podcast, is it called Searching for It or In Search of It?
Searching for It, yeah.
One question from our...
I'd highly recommend it, by the way. Check it out.
It's really good. Awesome. Our friend and fellow podcaster Toby was asking, what is it?
That's a question for when I finally hung up my mic and I have the answers. Right now, I'm still searching. I mean, to be honest, like, if we're going to get into the whole question of like, is there something out there? Like, is there a meaning? Is there a purpose? Which is, I think, what I'm kind of searching for throughout this podcast. Like, what is the colloquial way of talking about it is like, what is the meaning of life? Like, what are we here for, and what are we living for? What's the best way to direct our lives towards? Where I'm personally leaning towards is, I don't know if you know the philosophical concept of the absurd.
Yeah, like Albert Camus. Existentialism.
Exactly. The absurd being the idea that if there was a meaning or a purpose, something like that, it would be out of our grasp. We wouldn't be able to know anyway. It's not something you can go out and search for in the world and you see it in front of you empirically. Unless, of course, there was some crazy explanation, like maybe we busted out of a simulation and we came back to the host reality and they were able to tell us. Or maybe if you believe in a religious explanation, then that might be the case. I'm personally not sold by any of those. So where I would want to go is along the lines of the absurd. There is nothing tangible that we can grasp. So I think the best thing we can do for now is look at the accidents of how humans have turned out as a result of evolution, the way that we happen to be, and look at the kind of things that work for us day to day. And they might be different for different people. For some people, they might look at Buddhism and that gives them some kind of a solace. Some people might want to live more in the ethical realm and they find purpose in being a good person. But I'm kind of not convinced right now by the idea that there is something objective out there and it, as it were.
And I quite love the idea that there's not one answer. Like, so you said earlier, Finn, you wished, everyone would be a bit more interested in philosophy, but isn't it great that some people are really interested in physics and go, that's a waste of time? And likewise, isn't it brilliant that there are multiple potential meanings to life and each people are exploring their own, and the rich breadth of ideas we get from that. This program being run 7 billion different ways.
True. I mean, I think that's definitely the existentialist way of looking at it, isn't it? Exactly. We can have 7 billion different people with their own different meanings, and that can deliver so much value. I think it doesn't write off the possibility there could be some objective meaning out there. And it's interesting to think about, but I don't know how we would ever go about finding that.
I like the idea that there's like one guy who's accidentally found it on an acid trip.
He happens to be right.
Oh, it's this. Like, no one's realised yet that he nailed it.
I really like Camus, The Myth of Sisyphus, and especially The Outsider, L'Étranger. That's such a good book. And I love the idea that the meaning is what you make of it. And I think like our other friend in podcast, Moraine, he's very into this concept, and Buddhism and Eastern thought in general, but this concept of life is what you make it, the absurd hero, the idea that you create meaning in the world, it's like maybe even if there isn't an objective meaning, maybe it's like what you make of it. So have fun. Do you know what I mean? Have fun making your own meaning and searching for it or making it or whatever. And I really like that.
And that's the end of the conversation. Yeah, I mean, I find that the most compelling right now. I would, on the other hand, say, though, that I'm not sure to what extent I do find that satisfying. Maybe I'm just a frustrated atheist or a frustrated agnostic. But I would love there to be something that I could cling to, something objective. And the idea that there is nothing and that we're going to die and that's going to be the end of it and there is no afterlife and it's whatever we make of the end of this universe. Some people find that liberating. It's just a matter of perspective. But personally, I just want there to be something else. I don't know if you kind of have that striving.
No, I think I've come to terms with it.
I mean, the universe is indifferent to whether you enjoy the experience or hate it.
True.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah. I mean, it would be kind of cool if it was like a computer game, like you die and then it's like respawn in
That's
3,
why I
2,
love
you'd be like, oh,
Simulism,
sick, like get another game.
Yeah, and Simulism is a frame of reference we can understand. So as you said, like it's entirely possible we don't know and we'll never work out, and it's way beyond our comprehension, like a fish trying to understand a city,
Exactly.
right? But this is why I think Simulism caught the public imagination. Firstly, because it was written in as a philosophy paper that a layman could understand, right? If this and this, therefore this, so probably this, and everyone went, wow, like blew their mind. It's the first time I'd seen philosophy in the equations, right? The logical symbols.
P and Q and all
so
that.
If computer power keeps going up and people want to make simulations, therefore we are most likely living in a simulation, right? And you're like, whoa, cool. But I think the other reason it caught the zeitgeist so strongly is because it was a thing we could understand. And in a post-religious era, for most of the Western world anyway, what you end up with is people going, yeah, I get that. We could be living in a simulation, like the Matrix. I get the reference. And then it became possible once more to have God, to have an afterlife, to have good and bad, to have points that you could score to make you do well in the game. And the theory that, okay, when they reboot the system, if I get a high enough score, they might invite my character to play in the next iteration of the game.
It's absolutely crazy. The argument that you mentioned, though, what I find crazy about it is the idea that it does seem absolutely compelling. The maths holds. So Finn, I don't know if you've come across a simulation argument yourself.
Yeah, for the people who maybe don't know it, more or less Chris explained it, right? It's the idea that like if it's possible to create a simulation with
so Moore's law
beings,
states that computer power keeps going up.
yeah,
right?
and computers.
So if that continues and we're able to create a simulation, it's also possible that, isn't it likely that people like to make simulations of things? People are already doing it now. If those simulations get infinitely more powerful, there will be a point where there is more simulated life than there is biological life. Therefore, we're most likely living in a computer simulation right now.
Yeah. That's the one. I like it. I think it was it Nick Bostrom and then a few other people who came up with it. That's fascinating. I don't know what it really means though, because even if that is true, it's not like our earlier thing about the computer game, like the idea like you'd wake up at the end and then like insert coin to continue. Do you know what I mean? I think like even if that was the case, I'm not sure we'd be able to break out of it. So I'm not sure what it fundamentally changes. Do you know what I mean? What do you reckon, Lewis, about that? Do you reckon it would change the meaning of life if we couldn't like break out of it and go back in, or change between simulation and reality?
It's all speculation. It's interesting that this should come up though, as the episode I've got coming out next Monday, or a week on Monday, is actually on the simulation theory. So it's something I've been reading quite a bit about in the last month or two. So, and one thing I came across when I was doing my research, and I don't want this to be the takeaway message because this is the most out there part of it, but I was reading an article from the New Yorker. It was a really well researched article. It had access to some of the top people in Silicon Valley, one of the former presidents of Y Combinator, Sam Altman, I think, that's the guy who was about and had access to Elon Musk, all these kinds of people. Really long article. Thrown into the middle of it was the sentence that there are a couple of tech billionaires out there in Silicon Valley who are hiring a team of scientists in order to bust us out of the simulation. That didn't mention anything else in that article, and I found that really strange. Did a little bit of Googling, and there are a whole flurry of articles that came out in the week or two following that, like, saying what the hell is going on here? There are actually tech billionaires hiring people to do this. Apparently Elon Musk is one of the people doing so.
That doesn't surprise me at all. No.
Not even surprised to hear though, right? There's flat earthers trying to punch a hole in the ice wall on the edge of the earth. And there's those cults where everyone tries to kill themselves so they can join the comet, right?
Yeah.
Like, It's just the tech version of that.
It literally is, isn't it? But it raises questions. Like Nick Bostrom actually commented on this himself, and he pointed out that it's unlikely this is going on a big scale. But if there are people trying to bust us out of the simulation, they should think carefully about doing so, because why should we expect that their reality is going to be any better than ours? There's no reason to suspect that whatsoever.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Also, what would we do with a computer program that suddenly broke and stopped functioning? It's
Exactly,
sort of like
exactly.
with Rick and Morty, where he has a microverse that is his battery.
So good.
And when he leaves, he goes, look, he's smart enough to know that one of two things are going to happen. Either the battery's going to keep working, or he's going to be running a dead battery that's no longer
Go another
used.
level deeper.
True.
I think it's human curiosity, though. I don't think as long as there are humans who are curious and we have the technology and the I want to say wherewithal, but I hate that word. The mental fortitude. No, I'm digging myself into a hole here. As I think we're really curious, so we're going to try and do it if we can.
Well, this is what all philosophy does to me. It's why it bothers me. We end up digging in a hole. So I love this experiment. I love thinking about it. I found it fruitful and interesting and good to discuss with people about and read about. But then ultimately I realized, we end up at the same place. What is the difference between us being made by a tech genius somewhere or us being a biological simulation made by a god? They're in effect the same thing, right? Practically.
Largely, I think we'd probably go about our lives in by and large the same way. Like, you've got the speculative consequences that might come about as a result of it. Like, maybe that would mean there is some kind of an afterlife. We'd have a creator that could be meaningful for a lot of people. But I think there could be practical consequences as well. So you mentioned, Chris, that there are ways in which you might anticipate a creator maybe turning off the simulation if we were in it. Maybe one of the ways in which they might do so is if we were to discover that we were in a simulation. Because let's say maybe they were simulating us to conduct research, to see what would happen if X did Y. It's not going to model their world if we were to discover we were in a simulation, because presumably they wouldn't be in one themselves, or they might not be.
It would be a bad experiment.
That might risk termination.
So we might be ruining their bloody experiment.
This is how religions start, right? People start speculating in the absence of any evidence. What might the simulators want of us? Some people would think it's to live a good life. Some people it's, we need to become one consciousness and help each other. Some people, we need to pretend we don't know it's a simulation and keep the program running. In the absence of evidence, we're left just guessing. And that's why it's not particularly productive, I think, to try and extrapolate, because each of the 7 different billion people will have their own theories. I can just see religions forming already. Until that person gives direct instructions, hey guys, here's the sub-program I want you to run. We just carry on business as usual, I think.
I mean, there may be ways, though, that I think you might even be able to find definite implications from the fact we're in a simulation without the speculation that comes along with it. So another one would be that people have pointed out that if we were simulated, the computer that would be running us, running our simulation, the one we're in, would have only a finite amount of processing power. So if we were to then start creating simulations ourselves at some point in the future, well, that might actually involve them exceeding the processing power that they have available to them. Because let's imagine we don't just run one simulation, we run billions at some point in the long future. And then the simulations we run, they develop the capability to run simulations as well, and they run trillions. And it could be an absolute infinite chain of simulations. The implication being then that if we were to start running simulations ourselves, that could be an existential risk for us, because our creators might crash the system, or they might have to turn it off so that it doesn't crash their whole.
Guys, they'd just compress it like a JPEG, and they wouldn't be interested in any of the unsuccessful simulations.
This is going by our universe as a set of physical laws, right? We don't know that in the simulation outside there might be infinite energy and all that stuff. Do you know what I mean?
But and this is it. We're all as limited by our frame of reference.
That's true. We don't know what the real universe would look like, but I think all we can do is make our best guess. And if it looked at some point in the future as if nested simulations, so simulations within simulations, would cause some kind of crash in the computation, then that might be a very real reason for us not to go down that route, or at least to consider maybe not going down that route.
I find it comforting to know that the smartest people in Silicon Valley are equally as impotent chasing down dead-end rabbit holes. But, okay, it's like a different level of rabbit hole to chase in, and it's clearly very smart, but ultimately, they're probably just wasting their time spinning the gears inside their heads.
I mean, I woke up the next morning after reading simulation theory and my life was exactly the same. I'd concluded I'm probably in a simulation and nothing changed.
Wasn't it Bertrand Russell who said that, where you talk about nested simulation? He said it's simulations all the way down. Oh, no, wait, that was turtles. It's turtles all the way down. That's what he said.
Oh.
So what about some pragmatic? I think philosophy should kind of be pragmatic to some extent, right? And another interest that we have in common is Buddhism. So
yeah,
how do you think Buddhism can be applied to people in their everyday life? Maybe people who've never heard of it, maybe they don't know anything about it. What have you taken from Buddhism, like as a philosophy and as a religion?
Yeah, okay. Well, I think there's lots of different things you can take, lots of different routes you can go down. I personally, in my own podcast, actually, I've done 2 episodes on Buddhism, one on the kind of philosophy behind Buddhism and one on meditation and mindfulness. And I think they're 2 obviously overlapping, but 2 different ways you can kind of steer the conversation. In terms of Buddhist philosophy in general, what I find really interesting is thinking about the idea at the core of Buddhism that life it's often translated to suffering. The word that they use in Sanskrit is dukkha, and I think it means something more slightly nuanced than just suffering, because obviously it's not the case that we're all suffering right now. I'm not in any kind of like extreme pain. I think what it really means is something like unsatisfactory. Life isn't it's never quite what you want it to be. It's never perfect. You can never satisfy all of your desires, and if you do, it's only ever going to be temporary.
2-star review on TripAdvisor.
I couldn't have put it better myself.
That's really good, yeah.
So I think that's a good way of framing it, at least to begin with. If you ever, and I think that idea can resonate for a lot of people. A lot of different philosophies as well outside of Buddhism, a lot of Western philosophies start with that kind of premise that life just isn't quite what you want, what you would like it to be in an ideal world. So they run with that and they find their own solution to that problem.
I think we can all relate to it, right? It's like that feeling when you've just eaten a meal, right? And then you keep going to look in the fridge and you're like, I want something, but I don't know what it is. That's it, isn't it? It's that feeling. There's something missing, but I don't know what it is.
Such a first world problem.
Yeah, but in a deeper sense. But then you can also approach it from the other side, like of like meaningfulness, and it's like, what is there? What are we meant to be doing?
Exactly. And where they think the problem lies specifically is in, again, there's different ways it can be translated, but something like desire or craving or attachment, the way that we cling to things and we cling to ideals and hopes for the future and to people and literally to things as well. The core Buddhist idea is that by overcoming that, we can attain enlightenment and live a better life. You don't have to become a Buddhist, but I think thinking about those kinds of issues can definitely be meaningful for a lot of people.
Don't you think like Marie Kondo is like a modern day Buddhist?
I don't know who Marie Kondo is.
She's like a Japanese minimalist, and she's got this book about like something like what sparks joy, and the idea is like you should be throwing away all your old crap. You know, we don't want to hoard stuff. So she says you got to pick something up, like this F mug that Chris knows well, and you go, does this spark joy? And if you say yes, you're like, okay, I'll keep it. And if it doesn't, some random clothes you haven't worn in 2 years, you're meant to throw it away. But the thing that I find that's related to all this and that's interesting about it is that I try and practice non-attachment as well as I can, but I find that some objects have like a really strong sentimentality attached and memories and all these things, and I find that really hard to throw away. What I should really do is just take photos of all those objects, put them on the cloud and throw them all away and be a minimalist. But you know, I think you can tell looking at my flat I'm not really very minimalist.
But why? Like, this is what I find interesting with, you know, Buddhism has some great teachings, but as soon as people, and I think this is a very evolutionary psychology perspective I'm about to throw out here, but I think we look at Buddhism, we like the teachings, we say, how do we get the high score in that? We want the prestige and the status. If we've decided this is the best way to live, right? We're looking up to our elders in the village. How do we become better at that than everyone, right? Like, I want to be the best Buddhist, I want to be the best meditator. I feel guilty that I'm not throwing my objects away. Why? Like, it's okay to have some things. Like, and I just think we get trapped on that rail that human programming runs on so easily. We go from, okay, life is tough, this might be a philosophy to help, to self-monitoring and monitoring others. Is that person being Buddhist enough? Am I being Buddhist enough? Am I doing it? And it's just fascinating to me that that's a trap we fall into so easily. I've known many people that went and did meditation retreats, and they were frowning at other people who weren't taking it seriously enough, and they were, I'm taking it really seriously, I'm meditating the hardest. And you're like, that is ego. That's definitely ego. You're not destroying ego harder than anyone else. You're getting the high score at destroying your ego. No.
I found that meditation for me has been a practice that I've done while times are good, right? And then in hard times, like it's helped me to be, because I've built that discipline and that it's really helped.
Yeah.
Do you find that that's the case?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm going to have to be honest here. So I did, as I said, I recorded a couple of episodes on Buddhism. I recorded one on meditation. After doing the research for my episode on meditation and thinking about what I was going to say in the episode, I wanted to give it a go myself. I thought this sounds absolutely fantastic, and I meditated every day for about 5 mornings.
So had you not meditate?
I had before doing the episode, and I mentioned this in the episode, I'd kind of use meditation as a get out of jail kind of card when I was feeling anxious or stressed or something. I would meditate for 10 minutes and get my mind back at ease. But what I learned is that actually within Buddhism, the context of Buddhism, meditation can be used for so much more than that. So I really wanted to give it a go. Every morning for about 5 mornings, I sat down on a rock. When I was in Cambodia by the beach, I'd sit down on my favourite rock in the morning, looking out to the sea, meditate for half an hour. And it was fantastic. And I was getting some real good benefits from it, actually. But then 5 days later, I guess the enthusiasm waned and I haven't meditated since. So I can't comment on how much benefit one can get from meditating every day and whether that can give long-term effects. I think certainly from the research I've done, a lot of people say absolutely yes, it can. I guess for whatever reason, I just haven't been able to motivate myself to keep it going.
You're not alone there. So I know people that spend so much time talking about the benefits of meditation.
Yeah.
When you get to know them well, you're like, but honestly, how often do you do it? They're like, I should do it more.
Yeah, everyone's
do
like,
it more.
it's a question of discipline, isn't it? Discipline
only takes you so far. What's interesting to me is why Buddhism intersects with religion and the Western attempt at decoupling the two. To varying degrees, right, of success. So, and it's this very old Chinese argument of, whether you should just be pure in thought. And then there was, the greats who were like, no, like, unless it's a socially dictated program that you have to get up in the morning and do this thing, people won't do it and the behavior doesn't stick. And this is why it gets coupled with religion. It's like, you must do it because otherwise you'll go to a hell. Even like in lots of Asian countries, people think Buddhism doesn't have ideas of hell, but they do because it's coupled with the old religion that existed before and this societal top-down pressure of, okay, guys, this is how people should live. And so what you end up with is, we should meditate. Yeah, otherwise we'll have a bad life and we'll have bad this. Okay, now we know we should do it. We'll teach our kids to do it. And that family over there whose kids didn't show up at temple on Saturday morning, okay, they're the bad family. Kids, you're not allowed to play with them. Let's judge them. Now, we never really got this conversation before because when I was talking about it, Moraine pointed out that I was criticizing Buddhism for being corrupted, as all things in life are. People aren't perfect. And that's a very valid point. But there's a bigger point that I'd like to touch on is that I think it's very easy when studying something from afar to put it on a pedestal. The ideal of Buddhism, it's brilliant. As you say, practically for every individual with their own lives and things to be doing on with. And not even that. It's not even that we're too busy. It's having the discipline to do anything regularly. Like, be it... I actually have more respect for people that go to the gym daily because for me that is hell. It's the most boring activity on earth.
Yeah, man.
Like a hamster running in a treadmill.
I used to think exactly the same, man, but I changed that. But I think meditation is easier than going to the gym. Like, I reckon this is the key for anyone out there listening, or for you guys if you want to do it, is like when you go to bed, right? Set your alarm clock. I'm a bit weird, like I work out how many hours I'm gonna get. Like today I messed it up, but I work out like 7.5 hours, right? Add another 15 minutes for falling asleep, add another 10 minutes and meditate for 10 minutes before you go to sleep. And then the pure Buddhist or like the hardcore people go like, no, it's terrible, what if you fall asleep? It's like, that doesn't matter, just chill. Do you know what I mean? So you meditate laying down for 10 minutes before you decide to fall asleep. And you're going to be doing that every day anyway. You're going to bed every day. Do you know what I mean?
It depends on what you want to take from it, really, though. Like certainly this whole meditating before sleep, like if you're just doing it for the sake of de-stressing after a day, ridding yourself of anxieties, I think that can be fantastic. But I think we can't totally separate meditation from essentially the pursuit of nirvana, which in Buddhist philosophy is what you're trying to get there. And if that's the route you're trying to go down, if you're trying to go 100% Buddhist, then I'm not sure the meditating before bed technique is what's going to lead to the kind of insights.
I get what you're saying. What I'd say in response to that is you don't only have to do it before bed, but it's like a good way to develop the the habit, like basically, and it's like a way that you can do it without having to be like ultra disciplined. You can get 5-10 minutes every day, and if you fall asleep, like it's not that big a deal. Do you know what I mean? Whereas like I know what you're saying, like the sort of more purist or the more maybe religious Buddhist people might frown on that, and I know that I've listened to a lot of different people talking about meditation, and some of them are very like, you shouldn't fall asleep, that's terrible. You know, and it's like, well, it's not the biggest deal in the world,
again,
is it?
Right? It's this status, it's this ego, it's this person that's positioned themselves as authority, telling other people, I'm above you because I do it better than you.
Right, but what I'm saying is, like, do that every day, 5-10 minutes, and then you're getting your daily meditation in, and even if it's just to relax, fine. And then if you're, like, interested in exploring that other side of, like, the more active meditation, sitting meditation, walking meditation, Zen meditation, whatever it is, try that during the day, 1 day a week, whenever you feel like it. Do you know what I mean? And then you've got discipline, and then you've got the interesting as and when sort of meditation when you feel like it.
Yeah, I'll take your point, actually, to be fair, because as you say, everybody falls asleep every day. It's something you're going to be doing anyway, and you're not doing anything else when you're trying to fall asleep. It's maybe a gateway to then maybe doing it with more frequency and more intensity later on, if you so choose.
Exactly, yeah. And what I find is people are doing stuff though before they go to bed. Like, who doesn't lay there at night and go like, oh my god, tomorrow I've got to do this, and then I haven't done that thing I was meant to do today. Do you know what I mean? It's like you get on a train and then whoosh, you get on that train of thought and you just go off. Do you know what I mean?
And then you're awake for a long time.
Or you just get bored of your own brain and fall asleep. But I really like that train analogy. Someone told me that once. It's like the thoughts coming and going. Do you know what I mean? Because you're not trying to control your thoughts. That your thoughts are coming and going. They're like trains, and you're at the train station. Do you want to get on the train, or do you want to wait and let the trains go?
Yeah, distancing
I like
yourself
that, actually.
from that. And realising that, like an emotion, you can feel it happen. You get annoyed with your housemate because he didn't do the dishes. And you just decide not to get on that train, realising that you're like, I don't need to get on that train of thought. Like, it's fine.
Yeah, it's like there's
it's liberating.
There's a gap, isn't there, between like becoming the feeling, and there's a little gap. And meditation, I think, is just trying to get like a wedge in that gap to make the gap slightly longer for you to then be able to go, actually, I don't need to get annoyed at that or whatever.
No, absolutely. I think that's exactly what it does. You start to realize that these thoughts that are being like thrown at you, they're not you. Like, you're not choosing for these trains, as you say, to come into your mind. So why should you feel obligated to hop on every train? I think that's a really good way of looking at it, actually. And then when you've been meditating for a while, you can say, actually, no, like these things, they're not me. I don't need to get bogged down in this. I don't need to cling to this. I'm just going to focus on the things I want to focus on.
Chris, a question for you about this.
Yes, mate.
The idea of like getting that wedge and not identifying with your thoughts, this is something that Eckhart Tolle talks about, right? It's like you don't have to become your thoughts. It's very long-winded, but basically he thinks we've got a pain body and you identify with the pain body and that causes suffering. So he's saying like, just don't identify. But like from a psychological perspective, is there an element of like running away from feelings and not dealing with them properly and emotions? Do you know what I mean? If you just don't associate yourself and just go, I don't need to get angry about the dishes.
I mean, as a repressed British male rather than a psychologist, I can associate with, very good at pushing things.
That's my question.
Down.
How much is repression and how much is
not
just
dealing with them
dealing
healthfully?
With emotions, right?
I think, again, like Moraine said it well in that just because a coping mechanism is bad doesn't mean it's not okay, right? Like, so although, in hindsight, that wasn't the most, textbook example of perfectly dealing with your problems. Sitting down, acknowledging it, doing the appropriate course. We're all irrational beings that get emotional. I think that's okay as well. Like, I don't think anyone should try and use Buddhism to deprogram themselves of emotion. Like, as I've said before, I think these emotions are valid responses to stress and stimulus.
It's like they're necessary for something. They're giving us
the housemate example. If every day is miserable and with living with some people, you shouldn't meditate your way out of worrying about that. At some point, you should acknowledge that there's a problem and get the fuck out of the house.
Or get them to bloody
there's only so much
in their room,
push the feelings down.
Just go full Peterson on them. Do you know what I mean?
Sure, but I don't think Buddhism's the problem there, because actually it's not that Buddhism, that's a misunderstanding of Buddhism, right? That it's stopping thinking, people are like, oh, you just turn your brain off, and like you're placid like a cow. And actually, as we've said, Buddhism, you can think on things, but it's just thinking in the moment about that thing rather than worrying about what you have to deal with tomorrow. Okay, housemate just did that. Let's live in that moment. What's the best way to respond? Okay, I'm getting emotional there. I've got on an emotional train. Okay, let's stop that. It's still okay to think about things, but just calmly and empathetically, which probably will lead to a better life. Even if it's just, okay, I'm going to go have a polite conversation with my housemate. That doesn't fix it. Okay, time to move in with someone who's more aligned with my level of hygiene standards. Which leads me on, I think, it's something Lewis touched on a couple of times. Firstly, when talking about Buddhism and reaching nirvana. And before, when he was saying, if he found the it he was searching for, maybe he would stop doing the podcast. Now, there's actually that very same debate in Buddhism between those Buddhists who believe that the object is to reach personal nirvana, escape the suffering, and those Buddhists who say that, no, it's not possible. As a solo mission. Your job is to understand nirvana and make society a better place so that we can all reach nirvana together. And I think that is an interesting debate, and it just shows that there isn't a Buddhism, there isn't one path that someone's on, but there's always these nuance and debates and conversations that are happening. I just want to grill on that really, like, how do we separate ego from teaching, and how do we know when's the time to teach people what we've learned about Buddhism, and when's time to be humble and just learn.
And what's your opinion on that? Because you've been around Buddhism, Chris, for years and years, right? I mean, you spent a lot of time in Thailand and...
Yeah, so it's been interesting. My experience is different to others because I saw Buddhism as a lay person first, as a religion first, as a community first, before I studied it as a practice. And then when I started reading the books, I was like, oh, okay, like a different level of understanding, but also a disconnect between a Western person that's gone on a holiday to Asia to study that as a philosophical exercise versus how most people who you would class as Buddhist live and experience it. And for me, there is this dream that's been sold that there's this Buddhism where people are wise and kind and empathetic. And as we all know, people, it ties us together beautifully in a warm message that we all are one. And the one, unfortunately, is often racist, classist, judgmental.
Yeah, but not you.
Egotistical, yeah. But we all share that, so at least we have that in common.
I'd like to do a quick analogy there. I was talking to one of my mates the other day, and he was saying about in reggae, like the whole unity thing, and then he was like saying about right-wing people in reggae as fascinating, and he was like, yeah, we're all one, one consciousness, one unity, except the fascists, you're not welcome. Do you know what I mean? It's probably the same with psytrance, isn't it? It's like, how are they fascist?
I think it's interesting what you say though, Chris, about your experience in Asia and how you went out there, like trying to find these philosophical answers and whatnot, because I certainly found my experience actually in the last 6 months is the way the Buddhism is practiced can be, I think, sometimes quite different from the way that it's actually talked about kind of in the literature. So you see a lot of kind of cultural traditions out there in terms of like shrines and giving offerings and that kind of thing, and bowing in front of monks, when in actual fact I was surprised to learn that these kinds of things aren't really integral to Buddhism. Like there's a lot less frills when you're reading the literature and looking at what Buddhism actually is at its core than you would expect from what you see in the movies, really. And I think that when you see the practices, I think in a lot of places around the world are actually, I think, more cultural traditions than they are actually part of the religion at its core. And I think the religion at its core is something that can be applied to anyone in any circumstance, like anywhere around the world.
Lewis, what do you make of this distinction between exoteric and esoteric? Have you heard of that distinction? It's like exactly what you're saying there. Like, so the esoteric is like the essence of the religion or the philosophy, and then the exoteric is like the outer sort of like cultural practices and stuff like that. So the idea is that like all religions have a different exoteric external practice, the way it's practiced, the way it's done, and that's kind of different everywhere, and that's based maybe on the traditions of that society. Whereas when you go more into the center of the circle, the esoteric, you begin to see much more overlap between all the different religions. From what I can tell, in the middle, right in the middle there, is the main idea of like the golden rule, basically. Just don't be a dick. Be nice to other people. Like, treat other people.
That really is how the golden rule has been translated these days.
Yeah, that's what it is, though. Treat others as you want to be treated. Just don't be a dick. Do you know what I mean? So that's a fascinating thing. So there's all this culture and around the edge and all this kind of stuff from the society before. It's a bit like in Islam, you know, when people say about wearing the hijab, the naqib. It's like this was a cultural practice in the Middle East before Islam. And then Islam came along, the two got meshed together, right? And I think probably the same is true with Buddhism. So it's a fascinating idea. It's all the same, isn't it, in the middle? Don't be a dick.
No, in a sense, it's not surprising, given that a lot of modern day, not all, but a lot of modern day religions came from the same starting place. And then as well, I think Hinduism and Buddhism, I think, had a lot of overlaps in their origin as well.
Yeah.
I haven't read it myself, but my friend was talking to me about Jordan Peterson recently. I haven't read any of his stuff yet.
We love JP on this channel.
Big fan of JP on this podcast. But I think he made a similar argument, right? At least my friend was telling me that when you look at all the different world religions, at their core, there's actually an awful lot of agreement there.
Yeah, Karen Armstrong does a beautiful book about it called The Golden Rule, pointing out how all these religions came up with the same golden rule at the same time. She posits the theory that it's because of the invention of the wheel. So you always had the idea of you could raid your neighbouring village, but they were only a horse ride away. And you could only take what you could carry on a horse. Once you had the cart, you could take everything from the village and all the women as well. And once that came to fruition, everyone started realizing, okay, we need to start treating people how we want to be treated. Otherwise, every progress in society falls apart and it just becomes a bunch of barbarians attacking.
So is the thought that that's where religion came from, or is that where ethics came from, according to the book?
That's the thought. They used to not be disentangled, right? Like it was Jesus, right? Didn't say, make a religion out of me. Buddha actually actively said, don't make a religion out of me. They were just ethicists and philosophers of their time.
I'm not the Messiah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, Buddha actually said, right, don't make a religion out of me, please. It's a famous Buddhist teaching. They were philosophers of their time and their ideas spread. And a lot of that and the merging of it comes through this trade route, such as the Silk Road,
India to Southeast,
which is
Asia.
Which is why you get the fusion of Buddhism and Hinduism across Asia. It's the greatest hits, right? It's now that's what I call philosophy traveling along those routes, right? Like the highlights, sure, because only the cream rises to the top, and there are arguments, if you want to get into it, that Jesus is the greatest hits of 200 of the best philosophers of that era. The same as likely Buddha, especially when you have an oral tradition of telling. When I tell a story, if I'm about to bring a fourth character into the story, do I introduce him? Does that make for a better story? Probably not. So, okay, Finn just becomes that much more whimsical when I retell the story for the 12th time. So I think you get that blend. And then, as you've said, every country it goes through, it fuses to the local culture. And so what you end up with, and I hinted at this with what I said earlier, is the culture is you must go to temple on a Saturday, and then that temple becomes teaching more Buddhist philosophy than what it was teaching before. So then it becomes you must attend Buddhist services on a Saturday. And the whole thing just fuses in people's mind. For strong atheists, that's an evil, horrible thing that's ruining people. For, as we've said, it's hard to do practices like meditation if it isn't socially enforced, if it isn't a habit, if it's completely decoupled from your day-to-day life and society. If it's not a religion, it's quite hard to tell your employer, I need to spend 10 minutes meditating. But now it is, that hopefully would be accepted by most people as a practice.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Oh, it's definitely moving in that direction. We had a mindfulness workship actually in my last workplace about 9 months or so ago, which was actually it was a really brilliant day. It's nice to see they're taking that kind of thing more seriously. I found it especially interesting actually when I then after the fact came on to be doing my research about Buddhism and meditation, because mindfulness in a Buddhist context is really quite different from mindfulness in a Western context. So I think within Buddhism, it's more about like an active attentiveness to the world, while of course like not clinging to things as they pass through you. And I think when you look at mindfulness in just a Western context, it's that first part. It's the not clinging to things, not letting things bog you down, but it's less about the actual active observation of the world. Because I think for Buddhists, they want to use mindfulness to actually find truths, to find enlightenment, to see the world as it really is. But in a Western context, it's just about de-stressing. It's not about finding any kind of truths or seeing the world in a particular way.
I saw a beautiful meme about it, which says like that highlights that problem, in that workplaces are using it to make workers more productive. So it's like, oh, we're really stressed. Yeah. We don't know how to deal with it. And they're like, could you pay us more and hire more people so we don't have so many responsibilities? So we were thinking more like a mindfulness workshop and yoga on Wednesday evenings.
What about more practical concerns of Buddhism, meditation, philosophy? Maybe we could talk about giving and altruism. In Buddhism, the idea is to let go of your ego, and then in theory, you can do altruistic things. You can be a good member of society. You can do the right thing. Whereas egoistic altruism, on the other hand, is doing stuff because you feel good. Basically, it's like I give to charity because it makes me feel better
and raises my standing in society.
Yeah, like you're doing it for yourself, really, but it has a great effect on the world. Right, so like, what's the difference between those two? Non-egotistical altruism or egoistic altruism, if that exists.
So if you're an altruist, do you need to dissolve the ego in the way that a Buddhist would?
Right, that's my question.
I certainly would count myself as part of the group that would want to say, if what you're doing is what's going to maximize the amount of good that you're doing, do it. If that makes you feel good, or even if you're doing that because it makes you feel good, or because you're going to get some kind of social standing, like, great, that's a double whammy. But so long as you're actively contributing something to the world, you're probably doing an awful lot more than most people.
So you're a utilitarian.
About as utilitarian as they come. I've been exposed already.
Even the act of judging someone for doing something for the wrong reasons falls into established societal norms. I think it predates Jesus, but it's a Christ teaching, right? If you're giving for the wrong reasons, you look to someone's heart, and if they're giving for the wrong reasons, that's the problem. And the reason why we have that as a rule is because I think evolutionary psychology, Stone Age mind, it's really important to understand when someone's giving. Are they doing it because they're a good person and that behavior will be consistent, or will they only be good when there's an audience?
You have to know how they're going to act in a different context.
Yeah. And that the theory of it is, to simplify, when we go out to kill a woolly mammoth, after I've killed the woolly mammoth with you, what's to stop you from having spent the last months telling everyone what a good person you are, killing me, saying, oh, whoops, the mammoth got him, and so there's more meat for you and your family, right?
Yeah, so I think what you're saying there then is that one's altruism, it depends on how egoistically motivated that is, to the extent that it might bear on their future altruistic efforts. But if we're assuming that one's altruistic efforts are going to be consistent either way, if we're looking at this like one is going to produce the same amount of output either way, does it matter whether or not it's egoistically motivated? If we're running with that initial assumption, I can't see why it would matter.
Logically, yes, but I'm saying we have evolved hatred, like a disgust on an evolutionary level, not even on a logical level, to distrust and detest and gossip about people that do the right things for the wrong reasons. It's something that, as you say, even if logically it doesn't make a difference, you'd be fighting against the evolved human nature of really not trusting people who do the right things for the wrong reasons. That is why I think we are so against it. I don't think that comes from the teaching of Jesus. I think it predates it. Although a greedy, evil person might do massive benefit for society, there's going to be a very uphill battle convincing everyone, okay, let's let it slide.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair enough in a pragmatic sense, for sure. As you say, you want to know they're going to carry on doing good in the future. I think you also want to know that, like, there are other motivations that might be beneath the surface that you're trying to figure out, are not just selfish and not just egoistic, but they're not actually going to be actively harmful in a certain respect. So I don't know how fair this example is going to be, because I haven't done too much research about it. I just read one article somewhere online, but it was to do with that big fund that Jeff Bezos has created to combat, I think it was climate change. He's put billions of dollars towards it, something like $10 billion. So yeah, he created this huge fund. I think it was for climate change. But I read an article online that suggested that actually he might be doing this not in order to actually combat climate change or to create any kind of good effect, but rather so that he can control what the economy is going to be. He can have more control over what the economy is going to be looking like in a post-climate change world where a lot of things are going to be changing. He wants to get some kind of a foothold into that future economy. So in actual fact, it's not just the case that his altruistic intentions might be inhibited by selfishness and greed, but actually that there might be some negative repercussions if he doesn't want to be using his power in the future in a good way there.
Yeah, and the way America's tilted, you can pay a think tank that you own part ownership of, which is trying to dictate government policy, and call that a charitable contribution.
Right, yeah. And then it's not just the case they might be doing that, with selfish intentions, but possibly even with malicious intentions if they want to be lobbying in the wrong kind of way.
Yeah, I mean, it's this whole CSR, corporate social responsibility thing of
greenwashing, right?
Greenwashing.
To give a shit, yeah.
I don't know, yeah.
I don't think it's capable for a corporation to not be evil. I'll put it that way. I think only a group of Dunbar's number, 120 people, are capable of being like, "Hey, dude, that's a dick move." And once the number goes above that, you just have infinitely more chance. Well, not infinitely, but exponentially, progressively larger and larger chance that the responsibility will be diffused and the goodwill will be, I guess that's someone else's. Oh, yeah, there's literally a department for that, the corporate social responsibility department. Hey, guys.
I think there's also another sort of sinister level on top of that is that if these people do have just the pure egotistical intentions for their company or whatever of let's just create this fund to look good, but really we're just ensuring the survival of the company, more profit, etc. But they greenwash it and they paint it like we care about the climate. Do you know what I mean? Then also there's this terrible thing that there's all these people working for BP and Amazon who do care about the environment, and then Jeff goes, "Hey, look, support this. It's green," and they go, "Oh yeah," and then they're supporting that, but really they're kind of being hoodwinked into supporting this green cause that's actually just bollocks. Do you know what I mean?
So the point there is that if the aim of the organisation is to make money and do good, it just becomes a weighted factor in the analysis, whereas a person, right, doesn't go, I shouldn't kill my neighbour and rape his wife, but unfortunately right now the benefits are just too high, whereas a corporation will always do that equation and be like, it's just not worth doing the right thing this quarter, sorry guys.
A corporation never has that conscience. It's all it's money, and then it's the conscience of the humans who are operating it. But if that process is split, then
God, this always goes dark when we talk about corporate.
We need to recover the episode somehow.
I want to talk about us for a bit. So, why do we podcast? What ties us together on that? I think it's interesting that we have that, the idea to discuss things in depth. And that's why we're talking today. And I'd also like to know, so you do your podcast solo.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
Yeah, where did the decision to do that come about?
Yeah, well, the way it came about is the period of time I'm actually in right now is less a gap year and more a gap period of time. Because I finished my master's in 2018 and my plan is to begin a PhD in the autumn of next year.
Quickly interrupt, what was your master's in?
Philosophy and public policy. It was really interesting, actually. I absolutely loved it. Far more so than my undergrad degree, actually.
What's your PhD going to be in philosophy as well?
Philosophy, ethics specifically. I kind of found that having studied philosophy at undergrad level and then at master's as well, I feel like, at least in UK universities, I don't know if this might be less the case in maybe French or German universities, but there is a huge focus on analytic philosophy. And when you want to be doing questions about things like existentialism, nihilism, the absurd, it really doesn't come up that much at all. I was lucky enough to go to an undergrad university where we did have modules on Nietzsche, we did have modules on Schopenhauer. Yeah, I just had a burning desire really to be doing research about this kind of thing in the last few years. And yeah, it's just been a really good opportunity having these few years outside of education where I've just been able to read so much. And I've just wanted to I just had this burning desire to kind of express myself really. I had all of these ideas going on about these things I'd only partially read about before. Yeah, it's just been fantastic to have the opportunity to actually research them in depth, start to form my own conclusions and find a way, a medium of actually expressing these ideas to people who are interested in listening to them.
That's so sick, man. Because I took like the opposite trajectory. I was thinking about doing a master's in it was like Buddhism and Christian mysticism, and then I worked it out, and I was like, this isn't going to make me any more money. Right? But it's not going to help my career in any way. But I could study the same things if I get a job and I just do whatever. So I've been working since I finished university, but I decided at that point, when I decided not to do a master's, to become like an autodidact.
Okay, yeah, self-learning.
Yeah, I'm going to study all these same things as you, like, plus whatever else. And I thought, am I really going to study it if I don't have someone going like, you've got to do an essay? And it's like, well, I rushed the essay anyway. Do you know what I mean? I didn't take it seriously. So I've always valued these conversations that I have with like Chris and Moraine and various other friends. And doing the podcast for me is like a way to continue to push the autodidact side of things and to continue learning. Really, I always love learning from Chris and Moraine and like guys like you, the guests we get on,
and the homework and the reading we do in preparation for each episode.
Right, it's a little bit of an obligation to make us look into things in a bit more detail than like I got stuck in a Wikipedia hole. Do you know what I mean?
So it actually structures it. Like, I find the same thing. Like, I've committed myself to doing an episode every month, which means, there's some structure in place to mean that, for example, I'm reading Kierkegaard right now for a future episode, and there's only so long I can put off reading him for, because I've got to get that episode done by a certain date.
Nice. What about you, Chris?
I think there was a beautiful point I was about to make, and I've just forgotten it. So,
was it like the idea that we have these chats? We always used to have these chats, right, at university. Like, as we said at the beginning of the episode, we used to sit around and drink tea and play poker and philosophize and discuss psychology and anthropology and history and all that stuff. And those were like the prime days for those conversations when we were at university.
Yeah.
Since then, it's kind of petered off somewhat. Like, I always try and have these conversations.
Exactly.
With people.
And sorry, Lewis, how old are you?
24.
Yeah, so I think it's remarkable.
10 years younger than.
Some of the differences we've discussed are literally born of that difference. The laziness with which we approached our studies, sitting around, was because it cost nothing. So when we studied, like, why wouldn't you do that? It was like, it was costing you $1,000 a year. You're like, like, whatever. Like, and the government would loan you that money that you pay back over ages. So I think that's a lot of the differences. Whereas now, obviously, if I paid the amount that you guys have to study, I would not be pissing it up the wall.
You're 50 grand. But we don't have that
Very
regularity,
true,
right,
very
Chris? Like, we used to have those conversations. all the
Yeah,
time.
well, exactly. So also being this age, I can't live in a house of 9 people anymore. Like, I find it far too annoying. Like, I think we would kill each other. So I really miss that social interaction that we used to. And so for me, the podcast is a social thing, and it becomes an opportunity for these chats. We recorded an episode last week we decided not to publish, and I said, like, guys, this wasn't a waste of time for me. I like just sitting around and talking. It was brilliant. And I don't think people do enough. The point I was going to say before, you reminded me, Finn, of the debate I see a lot of musicians go through. When you do something for love, or you do it for money. And I know a lot of musicians who, they want their full-time job to be being a musician, but obviously unless you're that 0.1% that gets massively successful, there's not much money to be made unless you're playing covers in a restaurant
Or doing weddings or something.
The question is whether it's good to be doing a lot of that and then occasionally do a bit of what you want. Or I know some other very good musicians who have full-time jobs doing something, and the only music they make is the stuff they love and they really care about, and they never do a cover. It reminded me a little bit of how a lot of people in academic circles are actually forced and couched to study certain things, not based on their level of interest or intellect or what's interesting to study, but based on the economic incentives put in place. And so you will get funding to do certain things and not others. I could have easily got a PhD if I'd have done a study which showed either religion in a positive light or religion in a negative light. But a lot of my masters was kind of synthesizing the two and being like, here's the salt, here's the sugar, here's the truth, here's the nuance, and no one pays you to do that. Whereas if I'd have gone either extreme, there would have been a funding group that would have done it. Likewise, Lewis, with what you were saying, how I'm not surprised it's difficult to study certain things because they want statistics, because you can't get funding unless you're presenting numbers at the end.
I mean, to be honest, I would say it's less the case with like certain continental philosophies not being studied in a lot of Western universities. I think it's less the case that's because like it's not economically viable, because I don't know why that should be any less economically viable than some like abstract fields in epistemology. I think it's rather just a case of fashion, really, and culture, that these kinds of things have never really been studied at UK universities.
Oh, right. And so you'd have to have a professor you'd be studying it with, sort of thing, and a university that would want you teaching.
Exactly, and those professors are few and far between. Exactly.
One hack I have found with psychology, the areas which are less interesting to study, unless you provide a lot of data and a lot of is people would do meta studies. So like, okay, I read 4,000 studies that other people have written.
They do that.
They're all qualitative, and here are the results for it, and here's the nice table, and here's the percentages, and here's the nice summary.
Yeah, I'm going to be honest. I think I'm going to be going against the grain a little bit here in terms of the opportunities people get to do research in things like philosophy. I think a lot of people within philosophy, and maybe I'll come over to this school of thought in a few years' time, like if I begin a PhD and I start to do this a bit more, a bit disgruntled by the fact there's not really, as you say, like incentives to be doing the kind of research they want to be doing, and they'll get a job and they have to be teaching these kinds of things they're not really interested in, and they can't do research on the topics that matter to them. To be honest, like I personally think a subject like philosophy that has limited economic viability, it's not something you can market so well. You're not going to be doing research, you're going to be selling to companies, that kind of thing. I think it's fantastic that anybody is paid to be doing philosophical research on abstract issues like ethics on a full-time level. I just think it's really cool that it happens at all.
Beautiful. I think that's the problem that's happening now, that university's so expensive. A lot of the boomer advice is, well, you shouldn't be studying something that's not going to get you a job at the end of it. And that's a really sad way of looking at further education, of just like, oh, it's just job training. Cool. What's best for the economy?
Yeah.
Well, we talked about that in our episode on education, didn't we, Chris? About should education be this like ideal that we strive towards, that's for the betterment of society and the individual, or is it just like what can it get you a good
It's
job?
very hard though to explain to a labourer that a percentage of their taxes should go to people studying philosophy, because you never know when 1 in 100 of those philosophers might come up with a breakaway theory that revolutionises thought. That's quite an abstract argument to make.
That's true.
Guys, I think that's a beautiful point as any to end it. Does anyone have an inspiring quote they'd like to share?
I've got one from the Tao Te Ching. It kind of relates to what we've been saying. Trying to control the world, I see you won't succeed. The world is a spiritual vessel and cannot be controlled. Those who control fail, those who grasp lose. Some go forth, some are led, some weep, some blow flutes, some become strong, some superfluous, some oppress, some are destroyed. Therefore the sage casts off extremes, casts off excess, casts off extravagance. One that's from Lao Tzu.
From Warsaw, I'm Chris.
From Cordoba, I'm Finn.
From Winchester, I'm Lewis.
Thank you very much, guys.